So this dramatic web of pleats have intricate wrinkles in the skirts, as it were, of the Nike at Samothrace. Um, Remind of the style of thought which only emerged with Friedrich Nietzsche. Um, Twice I have made this, if it's at all worth going into, I don't know, this Freudian lapsus, as it were, Freudian slip, of referring to gods that are not Ares as the god of war, the first time Apollo in a much earlier recording, and in the video immediately prior to this one, Nike, obviously the goddess of victory. But I think it's thinking of what was just brought to speech in the last recording. I'm thinking we should amplify that and lay out the bedspread of it so that we can, as it were, dream in it. I'm doing a little bit of curating in the on this channel. I'm including some videos that aren't my own, and the last one I included was on Neil Rausch, the great painter from Leipzig, which was formerly in his youth East Germany, he was formerly an East German before the wall came down. And his main theme, he's part of something called the new Leipzig Schule or school. But his main theme is the dream, and I think that there's something worthy in that art movement that has some something to say to Heidegger. So taking this question of the movement of the gods to the ideas, so I think this is still plays a huge role in, for instance, the contest between Leo Strauss and Martin Heidegger over whether historicism is necessary, and then Nietzsche's in there too, definitely. And that has a lot to do with the stability of the ideas. So, for instance, if we have an idea of a regime, or say some specific regime, the most important, of course, these days being the democracy talk, you hear all the time about democracy, then there's this question whether that idea, whether you can go look at Athens of the so-called Athenian democracy, and whether whether we're talking about something real that obtains in the world, and how that happens through the kind of metaphysical analysis that we were, for instance, just touching upon, just to give a basic orientation about what we're talking about in the Cartesian meditations, which on second thought, I've of course I've become aware that, of course, those meditations are actually called meditations on first philosophy. So first philosophy means metaphysics. So, and then he refers back to it and says, my metaphysics book from the principles of philosophy. But of course, we already knew it was metaphysics before he said that. I don't know why we have this insistence from Ernest Sosa that it's a theological text, which it certainly isn't. So we have the idea, of course, from Max Weber or Weber, the early sociologist, which sort of has an enormous power in American thinking and in the universities. And you hear it all the time of the so-called ideal types, so that the there's something we call democracy, and then you assume from the beginning that nothing in the world really matches that insisted upon definition, but it's just useful to hold place. I think this corresponds, by the way, also to the basic starting point of analytic philosophy, which is they regard definitions simply as something someone says, and then you get, and which is the reason why, this guy John Austin, John Searle's teacher at wherever I always get Cambridge and Oxford mixed up, but wherever they were at Oxbridge, somewhere between those two universities, which are geographically some ways apart, but they cooked up this idea of the speech acts, and that little book on how to do things with words, I think it was called. I read it a long time ago, and they said, "Oh, this is totally new. Like nobody's ever thought of this before." And so it is new in the sense that they're putting so much emphasis on the idea that a definition is totally arbitrary and that you can just state something and that it has nothing to do with the phenomena. So, like, for instance, Kant never gives any examples such as the example that's always given in connection to him by the analytic philosophy department of a bachelor being an unmarried man, because they're presenting something that they regard as simply a convention which is upheld by power in some way. So it's like, and then they ask, what are the conditions by which such a convention can become authoritative? Instead of asking about what Socrates is asking about when he asks about what justice is, for instance. So, so then you have this thing where you can see that when we think about it as a god, for instance, you can have a goddess of justice and you can have them holding those scales, you can picture it, and but then you can also say, and so you can give some sense of what justice is through things that can be visualized and brought through the genius of Muthos into our consciousness. Then you can have it in strict, the beginning of strict dialogic, or the science of reasoning, which is later on Thomas will say that this is a defect of nous, like, because it's happening in time. It's not the real. It's not the pure vision of the design of what, for instance, justice is. It's this effort to reach those ideas. This movement from the thinking in terms of gods or theoi has other valences, such as we see in, as Leo Strauss says, all of Plato's dialogues are works of art in the specific sense that Plato selects the material deliberately that he's going to put in the dialogues. So in the Euthyphro, where we're talking about piety, he deliberately excludes any talk about ideas, and he only talks about the theoi, or the gods. That shows a valence of this movement from thinking in terms of gods to thinking in terms of ideas. Historically, you can say what happened in Athens is that you have this moment prior to Socrates by 200 years or so, when Draco was asked to come in and make this sort of how did they call it? Gorbachev, Glasnost, the transparency. He wants the laws to. There was this demand that the laws become transparent, because what you had was sort of powerful families that would come out and say, we know how through divination or through ancient rites we have these ancient access to ancient wisdom, and we can tell you what justice is and what the law is. And also we have the bodyguards to enact justice. And then, so I suppose there was a rise in, as it were, the archaic middle class of Athens, and people who didn't have that power started complaining. And so Draco came in and made the laws clear. He had to make them especially harsh because there were no prisons and people were out on their own. And if you found somebody guilty of something, about all you could do is either let them go or kill them, pretty much on Draco's view. And then a little while later, people were happy with the laws being more transparent and written down in the squares of the towns and so on, where people could no longer just make things up more arbitrarily. But then I think one of Plato's relatives, Solon, had to come in and make them a little more humane. And so that's the background behind the discussions you see in the Politeia or the Republic. So then we get into this question about whether these ideas such as justice are eternal in the mind of God. And so the Heideggerian position would then differ from this Heraclitean position, where you had this